Thank you very much to the Chancellor and to all of you that are here gathered this afternoon. First of all, I'm very happy and honored to be here on campus as well as to share with the broader community. And I think that it is very appropriate that we have this dialogue after I speak 39 days before the general election of what will probably be one of the most important elections in the history of this country. Now, I know that every time there is an election, we hear people say this is the most important election. But I want to give some context as to why I feel this election is important, and therefore why it is important that people become involved in the democratic process no matter what your view, no matter who you support. Because I think that many of us operate outside of a context of understanding the forces that we deal with. 2 weeks ago, we prepared to deal with the celebration of the 150th anniversary of the Emancipation Proclamation. On September 22nd, 1862, President Abraham Lincoln signed a proclamation that in effect said that on January 1st, 1863, that the slaves in states that were not in the Union would be free. From September 22nd to January 1st, those that were slaves, those of African descent, were waiting to see if the promise that Lincoln had made, the promise of the Emancipation Proclamation, would in fact come into being. That is where those of you that go to church, that is where watch night service started. A lot of folk think watch night service is where you go to church, thank God at midnight, and then go to the club and get drunk. That's not how watch night service started. That's how it ended up in some cases. That is why many churches in other communities did not have watch night service, because they weren't watching for nothing. Watch night service in the African American or black church was around the freedom of the slaves, because at midnight, 1863, they could walk off the plantation. So they were waiting on midnight. Midnight came, no one revoked the proclamation, and history moved forward. Now, what you must examine is the real battle behind the Emancipation Proclamation was a battle over how we were going to govern this country that started in the founding of the country in the 18th century. There was always two colliding trains of thought. One was that we should be a country or a nation of states that would make their own decisions, that became known in the mid-20th century popularly as the states' rights movement. The other was to have a strong national union. So those that believed in states' rights felt that state of North Carolina, state of Alabama, state of Massachusetts, whatever the state, would make basic decisions on how they would govern. Those that believed in a strong union believed that a strong federal government should supersede whatever decisions was made by individual states. If you fast forward when Martin Luther King Jr. made his famous speech, I Have a Dream, in 1963, in the speech he talked about governors in that time whose lips were dripping with the words of interposition and nullification. Well, that wasn't just pretty language. He was talking about those that would interpose state law and nullify federal law. That was the fight in the 1700s when the nation was founded. That was the fight when they were arguing over slave states and free states. And it really was not about liberating blacks. It was about how they were going to conduct tariffs in industry. The agrarian farmers in the South opposing the northern industrialists and their elites. The way to break the agrarian rulers in the South was to take away the basis of their money. The basis of their money was free labor. It's easy to get rich if folk that are working for you, you don't have to pay them. So if you take away their work and their workers, then you in effect break their economic strength and the North rise up. In the middle of that, Lincoln tries to save the Union. Union says we're going to free the slaves in the South. South says that's our business. We're going to decide that state by state. They have a civil war. We come out of the Civil War, and how do they advance to make sure that the politics of the Union survives? They enfranchise former slaves to vote. So by the mid-1890s, you have 22 blacks in the Congress, 2 blacks in the U.S. Senate. Tilden Hayes Compromise comes along. Supreme Court reverses a lot of what happened with Plessy versus Ferguson. By January of the 20th century, when we go into the 1900s, no blacks in the Congress, no blacks in the Senate, because the right of blacks are revoked. Now, if you go from there to 54, the Brown versus Board of Education decision by the Supreme Court on into the Civil Rights Movement of the 50s and 60s, you understand the context of what we're dealing with on November 6th of this year. If you look at the daily paper of President Obama versus former Governor Romney, and Romney made a gaffe, and Obama was on David Letterman, and Romney said something else stupid, and Obama made a good speech. If you go through that, you really don't have a compelling reason to deal with the democratic process. But this is not about the personality of Obama or Romney. This is a classic showdown between 2 concepts of how this country is going to be governed. If one were to step back and was able to project and make into a physical being examples of the 2 poles of the American debate on governance, you couldn't have created 2 better people to personify it. One hand you have Barack Obama, who believes in strong national government, strong federal union that should make sure Americans have health care, that wants to make sure seniors have Medicare, that wants to make sure that young people can have education that the national government can guarantee, that can make sure that there's a safety net for those that are disadvantaged, that wants to make sure that there's no gender bias, that there's no race bias, there's no sexual orientation bias. That's one side. The other side is saying, well, we disagree or agree with some of that, but let states decide that. So what's your example? Well, President Obama passed the Affordable Care Act, health care for Americans. They fight, let states decide how we're going to deal with it, or we'll opt out. Let states decide how we're going to deal with gender equality, how we're going to deal with the equality of gays and lesbians. It is a battle that it does not seem as graphic as it did but it is just as vociferous as it always was between states' rights and a strong government in Washington. So when they talk about on the conservative side that they want smaller government, they really mean smaller federal government. They're not talking about smaller government on a state level. They really want to have the ability to decide state by state what is going to happen and not happen in terms of its citizens. Right now, we're in the middle of a battle over voting. No one would have thought in 2012 we'd be fighting voter suppression. But we are. One of the things that we've engaged in the National Action Network, late last year, over 30 states, including North Carolina, started changing what was required to vote. We now want government photo ID. Why? Well, we want to make sure there's no fraud. Well, has there been fraud? Well, according to the Department of Justice, there's been 0.0003% fraud. So if there has been no fraud, why do we need new ID? Well, just in case. Well, if we study the government photo ID law, it will knock out hundreds of thousands of people. The Brennan Institute says 5 million potential people that voted last time could lose their vote if all of the states go into effect. Why would you have a net loss? Why would you risk a net loss of 5 million votes to solve fraud that doesn't exist? Unless your intent is to disenfranchise millions of votes. Well, the argument then becomes, well, Reverend, we have to have ID to do anything. Yes, and we need to have ID to vote. I don't argue against that, but why do we need new ID that is government issued photo ID? We had ID when we voted for Reagan. We had ID when we voted for Clinton. We had ID when we voted for Bush. Why can't we use the same ID we always used to vote? So let me get this right. The photo ID, the voter ID that we had for Reagan, Bush, Clinton, and Bush again was all right. Now Obama runs for re-election, all of a sudden you need government photo ID. For what? Other than to make it difficult or impossible for some people to be able to vote. Some of us call it a poll tax. Oh, you're race bait. No, man called me from Orlando, Florida. Said, Reverend Al, I want to vote, but I cannot afford it. I said, what do you mean you can't afford it? He said, I'm 85 years old. I don't drive because I'm too old now, and I don't see as well as I used to, so I have no reason to have a license, which is government photo ID. I don't have a passport because I'm not going anywhere. Since I don't drive and don't have a car, to go get government photo ID, I'd have to go 27 miles, which means I had to pay somebody. And when I get there, it will cost me $18. I'm on fixed income and I can't afford it. That's a poll tax. In Texas, state university students cannot use state university college ID to vote, but you can use your gun permit to vote. Show you where their priorities are in Texas. So state by state, there are different requirements based on whatever that state has done. Some states, they push back the days for early voting. Used to have several weeks, now it's down to 1 week. Used to have Sunday voting. Churches that started organizing souls to the polls, they canceled that. The idea of a democracy as many people to vote as possible. The idea of a democracy should not be to put up impediments for people to vote, but it certainly ought not be a state-by-state proposition. It ought to be a national uniform basis that protects everybody to vote. Well, Reverend, y'all apparently know. First of all, if we're going to deal in the context of history, there have been those that never wanted everybody to vote. When the country was founded, women couldn't vote, and certainly blacks couldn't vote. We were slaves. We were not even people. So if you found the country that only white male landowners could vote, then you go into the late 1900s where, again, by law, blacks couldn't vote. And we had to fight all the way to 65 to get the Voting Rights Act, and then people died and suffered to execute that. Based on history, we are not paranoid to say they're suppressing the vote. We are intelligent to say that there are some that always wanted people not to vote. Why this country becomes sensitive when one raises questions of race and gender is beyond me. If you raise the issue of race, you're divisive. If you raise the issue of gender, you cause trouble. If you raise other issues, you bring up things that don't keep us together. No, if you don't raise them, you're keeping things that don't bring us together. The only way we can ever be together as a nation is all of us must have equal protection under the law and equal opportunity. You cannot have peace without the presence of justice. When you hear a slogan all of us made popular in the 80s, no justice, no peace, that's what that means. You can have quiet with inequality, but quiet is not peace. Quiet means shut up and suffer in silence. Peace means that we all are on the same even playing field and have the same shot, and we're at peace with that. Most folk that are talking about peace really mean quiet, because they have an advantage, some of us have a disadvantage, and they don't want us to annoy them talking about our disadvantage. I knocked you down, I got my foot on your throat, the least you can do is shut up and not bother me, because I got stuff I want to do. And if you make noise, the issue is not I got my foot on your throat, the issue is that you yelling too loud. Can't you handle it more dignified? What is a dignified way to handle somebody abusing you? Well, Reverend, that's back in the day. Well, you know, I mean, a lot of students talk about back in the day like we don't have challenges today. Well, Reverend Al, I wasn't old enough for the civil rights movement in the 60s. Well, I was just growing up there in the 2. I wasn't in 7. But unless you are under 5 months old, you was alive when Trayvon Martin happened. Unless you under 7 years old, you was alive when Katrina happened. So don't act like you so young that you missed the struggle. You missed the struggle because you just missed the struggle. There's still a lot of struggling going on. Wasn't nothing in the 60s worse than to watch a whole city drown. because the government levees broke and the government didn't respond for 3 or 4 days. That never happened in the 60s. That happened in your lifetime. Ain't nothing worse than a boy going to a store, getting a box of Skittles for his little brother and some tea, and walk home and get killed, and they decide in the police station that night that they're gonna try the case, find the guy innocent, let him go home, and never even put in front of a jury. Ain't nothing worse than that. Whether Zimmerman is guilty or not, it should not be decided in the back room of a police station. Well, you know, it always amazes me. We were fighting in Alabama on voter ID. I get back to New York. I get a call from Attorney Ben Crump and the parents of Trayvon Martin. They tell me about the case. I never heard of the case. I say, all right, we're going to rally and come down there. This is wrong. We want a trial. All we wanted was it was probable cause to arrest this man. We go down, make the case national. Then they say, here's Sharpton, the ambulance chaser. I'm not an ambulance chaser, I'm the ambulance. Wasn't nothing to chase, wasn't nobody else coming, which is why they called me. Well, Al just went down there to get a lot of publicity. That's exactly why I went. The job of an activist is to bring attention to stuff that y'all don't want out. Don't nobody call an activist to keep their grievance quiet. Your job is to bring public attention. Your job is to make the whole world know. So when you hear people talk, all Al Sharpton want his attention, tell him that is exactly right. Because the only way you're going to make change is you got to expose what is wrong. Now, I wish I could tell you that I learned that in college. I know this is college and everybody learns stuff. But Chance Landon said I didn't learn that in political science. I learned that because I grew up in the hood in Brooklyn, New York. I grew up in a part of Brooklyn called Brownsville. And when I was growing up, Brownsville was considered the most #1 impoverished ghetto in the country. Not that we was trying, but that's how it fell out. And we lived for a while in the housing projects, and we had roaches. And I remember one night I got up to go to the bathroom, middle of the night, and I saw all these roaches in the kitchen. And I ran to wake up my sister. There's a bunch of roaches, a lot of roaches in the kitchen. Leave me alone. I made her get up. She staggered into the kitchen, turned on the light, look, roaches gone. Now she really mad. I told her, no, I'm telling you, they were here. Leave me alone. She went on back to bed, cut the lights off, went on back to bed. I come out the bathroom, they everywhere again. I go get the same thing happen. After about the 3rd time, I figured it out. That when you cut the light on, roaches run for cover. Lights are out. Roaches will have a 6-course meal at your kitchen table. That's where I developed my activist strategy. I've been cutting the lights on roaches the rest of my life. Part of the job is to cut the light on. So, you dealing with the states' rights movement on health care, states' rights movement on voting, we need to put some light on that. You love America. You love them so that you will send young men and women to war and then cut their Pell Grants at home. We need to put a light on that. You want blacks to lift themselves up, assume responsibility, but you're not going to fund historic black colleges. You're going to cut the budget. We need to put a light on that. Don't let someone act like there are not challenges today, which is why we must engage the political process. So I hear people talk about vote because of what folk did in the 60s, get the right to vote. That's true. But you ain't got to go back to the 60s right now. What is going on gives you reason to vote. If you never regard what happened before, think about what they're doing right now. Whoever is the president in January is going to appoint 2 to 3 members of the Supreme Court. If the court tilts one way or another, that will determine whether health care remains constitutional, whether affirmative action remains constitutional, gender inequality, prisoners' rights, all of that's going in front of that court. Whoever wins this election, it will not impact just the next 4 years, it will impact the next 100 years. So you are sitting up at a time that states have re-energized themselves to take voting, take health care, take Medicare, decide on a state-by-state basis, cutting Pell Grants, cutting opportunity, arguing about how they're going to deal with the percentage and interest on student loans, dealing with stand-your-ground kind of laws in Florida and other states where people based on if they think you're a threat can blow you away like Trayvon Martin. And then you got to be convinced whether or not you're going to get up and vote. Something wrong with you. Trayvon Martin wasn't no activist. Just a regular kid going home. Anybody can be Trayvon Martin with a stand-your-ground law. Anybody will spend the next 20 years trying to pay off their student loans if we don't do something about these high interest rates and deal with how the government needs to be supporting people. You do not have to go back in history. You got to have a conscious, sober view of what's going on right now. Then the distortion, rather than make you look at the facts, they use the distractions. Well, you know, we may not agree on everything, but we've got to stand up for values. Well, what are you talking about? What values? So the issue, and Bush used it in 2004. So now they can bring this back. Well, President Obama said that in his opinion, people should be allowed to marry of the same sex. So therefore, I'm not voting for him. I was in South Carolina earlier this week. Some black preachers said, I'm not voting because of the president's stand on same-sex marriage. I said, well, let me ask you a question. Is anybody paying y'all to say this? How dare you say that, Reverend? You're insulting my integrity. I said, well, let me tell you why I asked the question. We've had presidents violate every commandment. And you never told folks stop voting. We've had governors violate openly commandments. Y'all never said stop voting. I was in South Carolina. They just had a governor left office because he's supposed to have been hunting up north and was down in South America with his girlfriend. Nobody talked about not voting. Now the president has an opinion. He didn't do nothing, ain't engaged in nothing, didn't say he was going to make a law, campaign a law. This is just an opinion. And all of a sudden, y'all got the Holy Ghost and can't vote. Something suspect about that. Something don't sound right about that. This whole using wedge issues, same-sex marriage, gay rights, women's right to choose. People don't have to agree with you to have rights. You don't have the right to make people's decisions. You have the right to express yourself. But they have the right to disagree. That's what a society's all about. I'm a Baptist. I don't need nobody to pass a law for me to be a Baptist, but they should not need me to have to give permission if they choose not to be a Baptist. If you make that law one way, it'll go both ways. Well, rather you're a preacher, you're supposed to know, but all right, go to the Bible. There was a law of Moses. Law of Moses said, well, someone committed adultery, they'd be stoned to death. They caught a woman in adultery. They was getting ready to stone her. They challenged Jesus on whether he was going to support the law. Jesus, not Obama, Jesus. Said that one of you without sin cast the first stone. And the Bible said, look it up when you get back in your room, that he said, the one of you without sin cast the first stone, and he looked down with a stick and started writing in the sand. When he looked up, there was nobody standing. And he looked at the woman and said, where are your accusers? She said, I have none. He said, then neither do I. Now that didn't mean he was endorsing adultery. It meant he was dealing with the option. Now, I've always wondered what made him leave. But when I got older, I figured it out. Because remember I told you that part of the Bible says he's writing in the sand? I think he's writing down all of their girlfriends' names. That's just the Sharpton version of the Bible. Don't be so heavenly bound that you're no earthly good. And don't let people use their interpretation of the Bible to deal with a constitutional issue with a theological argument. We do not live in a theocracy, we live in a democracy. And we are being distracted from dealing with the basic role of government by those that want to make the debate about something else. Don't forget now, there were those that used the Bible to justify slavery. You can use anything and interpret it any way you want. It does not make it true. But all of these battles are going on right now. Right now there are wars and rumors of wars. My real message is that the reason you must become active and involved now is that the struggles and the fights to make America the best it could be is not over. When you can look at the fact that all over the Middle East they're rising up around democracies, from Syria to Egypt to what just happened in Libya, all of this in your lifetime, all of this right now. Do not act like you're doing your forefathers a favor to become involved, like you have no issues you're facing yourself. Now, we need to be organizing more en masse to deal with these issues. It's amazing to me how little organizing we do today. Do you realize that Martin Luther King and Fannie Lou Hamer and Thurgood Marshall, they changed the most powerful nation in the world that never had a fax machine. On rotary phones, they went in Alabama and Mississippi and took on what was wrong and turned this country around. Here you are with all this technology. BlackBerry in one pocket, cell phone in another, laptop in your room, on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and can't get 5 folk together to do nothing. Because we have rolled over and accepted inequality and accepted unfairness. And when you accept a status, people don't have to beat you, you've defeated yourself. It's one thing to fight and lose. It's another thing to not fight at all. Now, there are those that tell me, Reverend Mal, I just fight a different way. Well, what way you fight? I meet a lot of leaders. Well, you know, I'm not out there like you, I do it my way. Okay, which way is that? If you scared, say you scared. Don't act like you got a strategy we ain't figured out. Just say I'm scared and sit down and shut up and let somebody that's not scared stand up and say what got to be said. We have real serious issues, and it also gives a real opportunity for those with the courage and the conviction to stand up and make a difference right now. And it does not mean you need a whole lot of anything. Movements start with people that have nothing but the determination to make something happen. Rosa Parks wasn't an orator. Nobody remembers no speech she made. Rosa Parks was not one that had masses of people behind her. She was not the head of no organization. She was not even a big name in her own church. But she just got tired of getting up, giving her seat on the bus. And when they told her to move to the back, she didn't make a speech. She didn't write a great essay. She didn't make a great commentary. She just sat in the way. If you can't do nothing else, learn how to get in the way and block what they're doing. Whatever it is you can do what you can do. Too many of us feel like I don't have the capacity. There are no resume requirements for being politically relevant. What is required is a made-up mind and the courage of your conviction. History is made by rejects that turn people around and make them accept something that they never thought they would. Anybody you read in history, there were reasons why they should have never been there. And as long as you accept that, you will never do anything. And I'm not going to guarantee you're going to win every fight. But you're never going to win if you don't fight. I stand up and fight. I may win, I may lose, but I can tell you one thing. If you get in a fight with me, you ain't gonna know you won till they wake you up in the dressing room. Because I'm gonna fight with everything I got. Because times are very serious. So, 2012, well, let's fast forward 30 years. Will they say in 2042 that when we were facing the re-election of the first African-American president, and when it was a battle over health care, sustaining of Medicare, sustaining of Medicaid, sustaining of college Pell Grants, sustaining of how to deal with student loans, when we were going to deal with whether or not minorities and women and gays and lesbians would have equal protection under the law. Did people come out and vote or not? They will record what we did or did not do. And what we did or did not do will impact them in 2042, because the judges on that Supreme Court will still be sitting there and making decisions, and they will either say this is the generation that saved America or the generation that flunked when it was their time to stand up. Now let me end by saying this is a personal challenge. Don't do these things just because it's noble and great for everyone. Do these things because it makes your life have a purpose. Everybody born should decide some reason, some purpose that you hear. I can tell you, Chancellor read my Bible, I've been preaching since I was a little boy. The hardest job of a preacher, most difficult task, is to preach the funeral of somebody irrelevant. That's a hard job. They roll the body down the aisle of some church, lay it out in front of the altar. Family sit up on the front row crying and slobbering and carrying on. And we're supposed to get up and hallucinate a life for you never lived. I mean, most folks shouldn't even have a funeral. I'll be honest, most folks should go straight from the morgue to the cemetery. Because there ain't nothing to say. They ain't done nothing for nobody, wasn't involved in nothing. Everything they did was for them. So who cares you gone? You wasn't doing nothing no how. Mourn for what? Miss you from doing what? The only people that matter is people that do a little more than take care of their own self-aggrandizement. Don't get me wrong, be successful, make money, live comfortable, but have a part of your life that gives meaning to your journey. Amen. So when your journey is over, somebody can say that your journey helped make a difference. And it doesn't matter what your rank is, it doesn't matter what you know or not know. If you make a difference, then your living is not in vain. Challenge you to be part of making a difference. Why? Because right now, in 39 days, we can make history and we can make this nation go in the right way. And you may never lead a march like I did. You may never be on the evening news. But you can show up at the polls and go in your little cubicle and you can just hit that lever and strike one blow for freedom and justice and walk out and nobody know what you did. At least do that. Reverend Al, can we win? Yes. I've seen a lot of things in my life. I've been in the mall over 30 times with mothers identifying the bodies of their children killed from racial violence or killed from police brutality. I've seen ugliness. I've led marches where they've thrown watermelons at us and called us the N-word. I stabbed once in my chest a few inches from my heart. But the reason I keep fighting is I've seen too many victories to know that if you don't give up, you can win. I was there in 1994 standing in the square, Johannesburg, South Africa, when they lowered the apartheid flag and raised the flag of the ANC, where a man 27 years sat in a jail cell. 16 years it was against the law to put his name in the newspaper, but he sat right there. And early one Saturday morning, they opened up the jail and he walked out. We thought he'd be broken and battered, but he walked out ramrod straight. And Nelson Mandela went from prisoner to president. You can win if you stand up for something. I've seen sad days. I've seen Sean Bell's family deal with 50 police shots. I've seen Howard Beach. But I also was there in January 2009 when they brought out Abraham Lincoln's Bible, the same Lincoln I started this speech talking about, that signed the Emancipation Proclamation. And John Roberts, a conservative Republican justice, stood there and held Lincoln's Bible. And I watched a black man named Barack Obama put his hand on that Bible and become the 44th president of the United States. We can win. If we stand up, we can win. I still believe that right is stronger than wrong. I still believe if you hold on, that it may not happen overnight, but change will come. I still believe that truth crushed the earth will rise again. I still believe that God is on the side of the oppressed and the downtrodden. And if we stand up, he'll hold us up. I still believe that Dr. King was not wrong when he said that one day we'd get to the promised land. I was there last October when we pulled into Washington, D.C. And I remember when I was a little boy, Dr. King stood at the Lincoln Memorial and spoke about he had a dream and looked across the Potomac at the Jefferson Memorial and the Washington Monument. Who would have ever thought that now on the banks of the Potomac, every morning Lincoln and Washington and Jefferson got to look like Martin Luther King's monument. I've seen too much not to keep on bleeding. So because I've seen the trend of history, the arc of the universe bend toward justice, I've committed my life, and I hope many of you will commit at least some of your time to do what's right. And I tell people everywhere I go, some of you heard me say it before, but I'll say it again. I have one goal at night when I go to sleep. Before I get into bed, I say my prayers and thank God for another day. And I have one goal upon when I rise. I want every bigot, I want every backlasher, I want every racist in America, when I rise up the next day, to say, damn, he's up again.